So the long-awaited Trump tariffs on India have been unveiled today by the White House. A series of tariffs, of course, that impact the Indian automotive sector, pharmaceuticals, of course, being exempt, but questions about how much these tariffs will impact the Indian economy, what they mean also for the American economy, and perhaps for world trade as a whole. Joining us to unpack these questions is Siddharth Zarabi of Business Today. Mr. Zarabi, could you break down the tariffs for us just to begin with, to explain to our viewers what exactly are the tariffs that have been announced by the United States on India this morning?
Well, very clearly, we first need to understand what has been done. There is no reciprocity, so to speak, and that is a misleading term. Why do I say this? Because at the starting level, the baseline has now been set at 10% for all imports. So, for the moment, ignore whatever else and country specific very high rates. Every single imported item into the United States post the implementation of these orders will now have a 10% tariff. This applies to even those countries and items which were so far having 0%. So this is in some ways a complete change in the way America for centuries, and not just the last 35 years or 40 years ever since the World Trade Order came into existence as we knew it, it is a reversal of almost everything that's happened since the 1800s with regard to imports into the United States. After this 10% baseline, you have different slabs, so to say. It's almost like an income tax slab, if you can draw your mind to that.
Right.
And where does India stand in it? The centrality of the situation is that India stands at number 10. I also want to point out a technical clarification, but which also tells us about how rushed and possibly botched job this is. The card that President Trump held up said 26% for India. But the actual announcement notification on the White House website, Annexure 1, says 27% for
Right.
India. So, at number 10, India is hit with lower tariffs than even a country like Cambodia or Myanmar or Indonesia, Bangladesh. And that, Shashank, is very, very significant if we were to move the discussion towards the India impact,
Right.
which is that India now stands to gain not just our pharmaceutical exports or exports of copper, exports of anything related to critical minerals and the energy piece, all of which have been kept out, including semiconductor and lumber, for example. What it really means is that relative to these South Asian, East Asian countries, which have been our rivals in the global export market for items like footwear or textiles, poor Vietnam, hit with a massive tariff shock. One of the key exports from Vietnam is footwear. Even the shoes that you see in India, I would request all your viewers to go and check out their sports shoes right now. Many of them are made in Vietnam. They have been hit far more than us.
Right. And of course, also Bangladesh and a number of other competitor economies as well being hit by higher tariff rates.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is what we need to figure out. The Indian stock market has perhaps digested this and seen through some of the fine print. The markets are a great judge of policy impact. And if you see the current response in the markets, textile stocks, pharma stocks doing pretty well in trade today, which explains to us that the impact, sectoral impact, is not that negative.
Right.
We now have a challenge upon us. That's clear. I'm not discounting the challenge that it means for the overall global system of a rules-based trade order, and the challenge that it poses to Prime Minister Modi's policy of Make in India and the import substitution policy that we've been following for 10, 11 years. And clearly, you track diplomacy. When was the last time you have seen so many trade delegations and conversations for bilateral trade pacts with a number of countries? So we've been kind of preparing for this for the past several months, and very clearly, a new trade dispensation is evolving, and that is the opportunity for India to make the best of what is clearly not a great situation.
Right. Mrs. Ravi, could I ask you a little bit about what you were alluding to, the fact that this seems to be a bit of a botched job because, there were debates and reports coming out even a couple of days prior to, even in fact, just yesterday, there were debates going on, reports coming out that within the White House administration, there were fights between hardliners who wanted a more extreme tariff. There were others who wanted a much kinder tariff, to use President Trump's phrase. This was being debated right up to the wire in the last moment. What does that say about America's predictability as one of the custodians of the global trade order anymore? When you think about it personally, and we look at countries all over the world, how do you think they're going to look at America and it's the predictability and stability of America as a custodian of global trade?
Shashank, let me try and kind of answer this in a big picture format. I started off reporting on the WTO. That was one of my first beats in the late 90s.
Right.
And one of the big stories that I did at that time, which caused quite a bit of a consternation, was one top leader of the BJP allegedly being seen wearing Nike shoes during a Padyatra, and that went against the Swadeshi philosophy that was being espoused by the BJP, and it had already come into power by then. So from then to now, what is really happening? The United States has been the chief proponent of global trade, and that was on account of the massive surplus capacities that US companies had created across sectors, in earlier decades. The World Trade Order that existed till recently was founded and funded by the United States. They went across the world seeking new growth markets. The growth of China is on account of what the United States has done, which is outsource all the heavy duty manufacturing to China and to other countries. The US has been a champion of outsourcing, and what Donald Trump is seeking to do is to reverse 40 years of outsourcing in 4 years. I'm not taking into account any potential third term for him.
Right.
Can it happen? There are big questions. So the reversal into what we knew was the globally accepted standard is massive. Right. One last point. The World Trade Organization and the next round of talks has been dead for years now. I would say that this reciprocal tariff announcement, which is clearly a rush job, given what the US Trade Representative report also said, including some very absurd, surprising claims with regard to India. What this really means is that the WTO, which was buried, has now, that coffin has been taken out by Donald Trump and his team, and the remnants within that coffin have been dispersed over sea, just as Osama bin Laden's body was interred in the sea, never to be found.
Right.
That is what the United States is doing. The rules-based free trade order is being dismembered and has been dismantled.
Understood. Mr. Zarabi, may I also ask you then, following up from your colorful analogy, can I ask you a little bit about how you see the prospects of a global trade war now unfolding? We've seen the European Union has come out and has made a statement saying that it is considering retaliation. Canada has obviously also retaliated already in the past. China, which has been hit by this massive tariff, is also vowing retaliation. Are we really staring down the barrel of another global trade war?
Let me use another analogy to explain this. How do you say this? We've had two world wars. They were wars over territory and to defend sovereignty. What Trump has done is to unleash another world war, but this is a world war around free trade. No one knows how will it play out. But one thing is very clear. This is now the time for case-by-case, country-by-country deals. Every nation will now look out to fend for itself, because exports are very, very significant to every economy. They are a source of foreign capital, and they lead to overall economic prosperity. China is the paramount example of a manufacturing export-led surplus-driven strategy in economic terms. We will now see countries doing bilateral trade agreements, putting aside their internal differences. And since you track diplomacy, I want to throw this back at you. What do you make of the most recent overtures between India and China? What is driving this so-called thaw, if it were to fully pan out? It's clearly interest. China knows the size of India's domestic consumption economy. We know their potent capabilities in manufacturing and their control of supply chains across sectors. So therefore, pragmatism will now drive trade policy. And India has not been passionate about it. We are not part of the retaliation. We are not indulging in a tit for tat, a reciprocal kind of argument. And my final word really, I think this is a great time for Prime Minister Modi's personal touch to our overall diplomacy, our trade diplomacy. For External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, who was just recently recognized by Business Today as the impact icon of the year. This is very clearly both an opportunity and a massive challenge. And for Commerce Minister and Piyush Goyal and the rest of the team, every other official who is involved in this, look at how we have been going around. We've kept it measured. We have kept it pragmatic. We have already among the few countries which have a formal agreement with the United States that we will work in the next 7-8 months before fall to have a trade deal, a bilateral investment treaty, where many of these sectoral hikes will then get resolved, because you will have a merit rate that will come in place. You will have exempted baskets of items, and you will promote non-goods related economic activity. For example, for India, services exports, manpower exports to the United States. And that, I think, is the bigger picture that we need to look at. Defense cooperation, strategic cooperation, the IMEC, all of that is, on the periphery. At the center of it is the fact that in every conversation in the recent past, President Donald Trump has spoken very highly about Prime Minister Modi. He's had good things to say about him. He's also made this point repeatedly that India is a tariff king. Well, that was because of our policies, decadal policies to protect domestic industry, to nurture domestic industry. And we now have a challenge of recalibration, and I think that will happen very well.
Mrs. Ravi, you're mentioning an important point, and I wanted to ask you just that final thing before we let you go. On these tariffs, there is, of course, the theory that I'm sure you've heard a lot about today, which is that actually these tariffs put a gun to India's head. The talks that are going on with the United States, that actually, it's a good incentive, it's a good push for India to really consider its tariff structures, to consider the fact that tariffs have been rising in India since 2018. This will bring so bringing tariffs down is a good thing for the Indian economy. It makes it more competitive, brings in more competition. Do you agree with that? More generally, this is exactly the kind of thing that India needs. Perhaps you also mentioned bringing in more investment, perhaps from countries like China. Some talk about, for example, quality control orders, whether those could be relaxed a little bit to allow more investment, make it easier. Do you think we could see a broader rethinking of how the government has approached economic policy over the last 7 years, or do you think that it's just going to be mostly tactical?
Madagascar has been hit, if memory serves me right, with the import duty of 47 or 48%. And for the life of me, I'm trying to figure out what is it that Madagascar exports to the United States, which has drawn such ire from the United States. So, that was just an example to explain the irrationality of what happens. Another bit of data to understand the US action is that a minuscule percent of items that are exported to the United States from India are at the highest tariff slabs. The average rate is much lower, 10% or just around 10.8%. So this is a broad stroke sledgehammer that America has unleashed on the world. And the hope is that every country will come to the negotiating table, and a big bargain and a big deal will be in the works with the objectives that the United States has. Every single expert that I have heard so far says that this will be counterproductive for the United States. So let's sort of leave that aside. I think in terms of what is the most likely scenario? The most likely scenario is that countries will now be forced to make individual adjustments with the United States of America. Those individual adjustments will be driven by not just cold calculation of items and costs, but also geostrategic interests. And very clearly, I leave you with this thought that perhaps that one economy which will position itself to benefit from this will be China. And China, as one of the biggest worries and perhaps our greatest security challenge, stands to be strengthened as a result of what Donald Trump has done. And we will be looking at China as well, even as we try and strike a pact with the United States, Shashank.
Understood. Mr. Zarabi, thank you so much for your time, for breaking down the impact of these Trump tariffs on India and the rest of the world.